you can imagine a happy and an unhappy future for this, and I gather your book imagines a sort of unhappy future for it. But the question is, this disruption happened to agricultural workers over the last 150 years. The vast majority of people who were working as farmhands, their jobs got disrupted. But nobody seems terribly. I mean, there's small towns in Nebraska that are sad about this fact. But for the most part, this has been a really positive change. So, Gerald, do you imagine that as is this a good thing if this is going to happen?
It all depends on how we manage the transition. So
that's a good non-answer.
It's very much under our control, and we have gone through transitions both in agriculture and manufacturing, and of course we have a huge service sector right now.
Yeah.
And they're really. I think there are really three debates here. The first is, are we going to develop robotics, AI, and other disruptive technologies that will both substitute for human labor and also eliminate kind of entire sectors, as Amy was saying. And when you look at the developments of just the last few years, it's very nascent at this point, but I think we can see the path to where these technologies are going to have a very significant impact on existing employment in the kinds of categories that Amy was talking about. Then the second debate is about the most common reaction is, okay, well, but we've always created new jobs whenever that happens. Agriculture, manufacturing, we have created new jobs. And so I'd just like to bring a little data, because a lot of that conversation is anecdotal, and the plural of anecdote is data, but there's also a lot more data that's available than just anecdotes. So if we can start with slide 9, this might be helpful for people. So when you look at occupations, in 2014, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out data every year. 535 major occupations. These are not tiny little jobs, but the major things that people do. And it is true that if you go back to 1914, 100 years ago, 20% of the occupations that we have today did not exist 100 years ago. But that means 80% did. If you go down that list, you will find 80% of the occupations existed 100 years ago. And if you actually look at the number of workers in those occupations, 90% of people in the US workforce work in occupations that existed 100 years ago. So while we do create new jobs and new types of jobs, the most common jobs, if you look at the 50 top occupations, there's only one, mine, software engineer, which is new in the last 100 years. So there's a common perception that we create new types of jobs. But the most common jobs are things like waiters and waitresses and truck drivers and cashiers and secretaries and teachers and nurses. And these are jobs that have existed for a long time, and they've existed with human workers because only humans could do those jobs.
But not anymore.
Although back,
back
100 years ago, we had 60% of the labor force as farmers, and 2% in post-farm food processing and so forth.
So there's been a huge shift.
Now we have 2% farmers and 8% in food.
There's been this is just about whether we are truly creating brand new things, over time. We're mostly shifting people into those jobs that computers and robots could not yet do. Yes. And when you look at what is going to be possible in the next, I agree with your time frame, kind of 15, 20 years versus 100 years, I think a lot of those occupations are going to be at risk. And so people say, okay, well, yes, we invent new jobs. We also invent whole new industries. And so if we go to slide 8, I think it's important to look at the industries that we do create and how many jobs they have in them and how many jobs growth we get out of that. This is data on total employment from 1993 to 2013. This is the internet era, 93 to 2013, 20-year time period. Obviously, we had a significant disruption in 2008. So we only added 23 million net jobs in this time period. Should have been higher than that, but we had a big dip. So if you look at where does that growth come from, half of that growth of 23 million net new jobs came in food services, retail, healthcare, education, and people driving vehicles for a living. So that's where half of that growth came from. If you take every high-tech industry, computer industry, internet, telecom, electronics, aerospace, chemistry, scientific R&D, only 5% of the growth in the last 20 years came from those industries. And in fact, those industries are only 6% of employment growth. So people talk about, oh, well, we'll invent whole new industries that people work in. The new industries we're inventing are not mass employers. They simply do not generate mass numbers of jobs of the kind that we have in those other industries. We added 4 times more jobs in food service and retail than in every other high-tech industry in the last 20 years. Those are the jobs that we've been creating. And those are the jobs that are very subject to automation. And then finally, people talk about the STEM jobs, or, well, people get replaced by automation, and so they should they'll just get educated and retrained and move to higher skill technical jobs or maybe creative jobs. These are the outlets that people think of. So if we go to slide 10, again, just to bring a little more data, this is the last slide. So you have total employment, about 145 million jobs, and about 8% of those are every computer job, scientific job, technician job, mathematician, data scientist. All of those jobs are about 8% of jobs. And then the little green, I apologize, it's really hard to see. The little green sliver there is every creative job in the economy. Photographers, artists, actors, writers, editors, choreographers, dancers, and all the media jobs, people here in the media industry, broadcasters, journalists, et cetera. And so that's a very small percentage of the economy. The economy is simply not made up of STEM jobs and creative jobs. So the second debate is really about, well, we'll be able to create all kinds of new jobs. We haven't really had an economy that's created fundamentally new kinds of jobs. What it's basically done is shifted a lot of people into jobs that computers and robots have not been able to do. And so I think there's a serious debate about whether the economy is actually going to be able to generate new jobs as these technologies step forward. The last debate that I'd like to get out there is, what do we do as a society when the demand for human labor begins to significantly fall off because of these new technologies? And I think that's the most interesting debate that is about 15, 20 years out, but we need to start talking about now, because it involves very radical rethinking of the assumptions about full employment, about people surviving based on needing to have a job. And I think there are very interesting solutions that have been proposed to this problem, including one that's been endorsed left, right, and center, which is a basic income guarantee that gives everyone a foundation on which to build their lives, but guarantees them an income that says they don't need to work to survive. And so I hope we can talk about some of those potential future solutions as well.
Yeah.